Chapter 3 Authority. You were born to this world with sovereignty over your mind and over your life. Your abilities to think, to feel, to learn, and to love are your liberty. In you, these capacities are infinite. You have infinite worth. Evil seeks to destroy your liberty. It seeks to be in authority over you. It does not want you to have liberty. Evil seeks to destroy you so that it can use you as a puppet. The implementation of evil is called authority. Authorities are what evil implements as it exercises control over the lives of people. Authority limits your ability to learn, to think, to feel, to love, and to grow. This is why authority is evil. Authorities are not accidents. They are specifically created by intelligent people to control you. There are two tools that evil makes use of in order to accomplish this. Both tools destroy freedom. They are culture and violence. Each of these tools of authority have weapons which are used to attack your liberty. The weapons of violence are theft, imprisonment, torture, rape, and death. The weapons of culture are law and the control of speech. Evil is implemented by force in the lives of people. Evil wants you to obey its authority. It uses the weapons of violence on everyone who will not obey. It uses the weapons of culture to sustain whatever obedience it manages to achieve. Violence. Your physical body allows you to exercise principles over every aspect of reality. With it, you have the tools necessary to interact with the physical world. Physicality greatly enables you. It is a gift of pure freedom. People obey authority when they are subjected to violence. Violence threatens your physical body. It threatens your interaction with the physical world. People who are subjected to violence are compelled to obey because they want to protect the freedom that their bodies bring to them. Pain and mutilation limit your ability to interact with your world. Death destroys your freedom completely. The lie of tyranny is that you will maintain the freedom of life by obeying authority. The choices it offers you are a lifetime of obedience or death. Evil is the master of deceit. The objective of evil is not violence, but obedience. The purpose of violence is to compel obedience. Its design is the destruction of freedom, whether submitting to authority and obeying or allowing it to destroy you physically. You will have lost your freedom. The only way to maintain freedom is to fight tyranny at all times and at all costs. Perspective. The cultures of Earth offer their people different moralities. Perverted definitions of good and evil are found everywhere on the planet. In one culture, a thing is proper. In another, it is taboo. In one culture, a word is egregious. In another, it is not. Criminal acts are defined entirely differently in opposing cultures. When an authority is established amongst people, evil is either obvious to see or nearly impossible to see, depending entirely upon whether or not you are part of its culture. Even though few people are able to recognize the oppression found in their own cultures, culture is still oppression. Most people question in horror how an average German soldier could himself participate in the murder of Jews. Most people question in horror how millions of average people under the umbrella of communism could bring their brothers certain death at the hands of police. The examples in history are more than plentiful. They exist in every culture ever designed. Culture maintains a death grip upon the nature of man. It is not true that history's villains misused authority. The truth is that they followed the object and design of authority perfectly. Tyranny is always disguised as culture and law. Authority principle. The authority principle describes the behavior of people who live under the rule of law. The authority principle shows that people obey anything and anyone that they believe is an authority. Though the who, the why, and the what have changed in history, the behavior of people is the same. They obey. When people are taught that obedience is principle, they obey. When they are taught that the source of worth and knowledge is found in another person rather than in themselves, they obey. This is the rule of law, and it teaches people that their will is subjective to the will of law and those who control the law. Examples of authorities are governments, bullies, mafias, thieves, and kings. People obey authority in their lives either out of fear of violence or because culture conditions them to accept obedience as proper and good. Authorities always use both tools. The most successful authorities do not have to use violence as often because of the strength of their cultures. Both culture and violence enforce authority. Under authority, people have obeyed law to the atrocities of history. The murders, raping, and looting under chieftains, kings, emperors, communism, and Nazis were not perpetrated by a small group of men. They were performed by thousands and even millions of peoples. These people would not have committed such egregious evils on their own. If a random person had commanded them, they would have refused. So why, at the behest of perceived authority, do they obey? Obedience to authority is the authority principle. People will obey authority no matter what is asked of them. They obey because they have been lied to. They have been falsely taught that principle is found in law. In history, it is difficult to imagine why some cultures are so much more violently depraved than others. Authority is the reason. Cultures with the least influential authority are the most peaceful, and by definition, the most free. Cultures with the most influential authorities are the most violent, and by definition, slaves. Anytime you are compelled to act in obedience to authority, you are being influenced by this principle. Evil uses the authority principle to condition people to obey without questioning what, why, or whom they are obeying. Destroying your identity to gain power over you is the modus operandi of evil. The pattern of tyranny. Tyranny is disguised as culture and law. Everything that evil seeks is the destruction of freedom, to destroy the value of people. The pattern of tyranny is simple. The object is to enslave the minds of people by creating a culture of obedience. To gain the obedience of people, there is a process that must be taken. This process is a pattern of tyranny. War. Before an authority can be established, war must take place. War is the implementation of violence. It is the tool that evil uses to establish authority. All of history's wars have occurred because of a desire to implement a new authority over people. On a smaller scale, this occurs via a process of threat and acquiescence. Such is the behavior of bullies, thugs, and mafias. On the largest scale, it occurs in violent multi-year battles, such as the behavior of nations and empires. Enemies. In order to offer people an escape from violence, new authorities teach people that obedience will end war. The design of authority is obedience. Authorities condition people to obedience by promising to protect them from dangerous enemies. Theocracies have used the enemy of blasphemy. The Nazis used the Jews. Communists used the rich. Many enemies have been created, but by far the most common is anarchy. Protection. In order to engineer a culture and pervert the free thinking of man, evil must create an enemy. It is not important to tyrants who the enemy is. Tyrants offer protection from these enemies in exchange for obedience. Take careful note that they offer protection, but obedience is mandatory. Whether or not you wish to have the authority over you, you will obey or they will revert to violence. The enemies are only created to ease the burden of obedience from the minds of people. Cultural enemies are an illusion. Benjamin Franklin taught that those who give up liberty to gain security will soon have neither. This is not an idle observation. The pattern of tyranny clearly shows that the entire purpose of presenting you with the need for security is to convince you to yield your liberty. That is everything authority wants. The demand for security is raised by those who seek power over you. This is how they create enemies. Make no mistake, it isn't the enemy that tyrants are after. They are after you. The illusion of cultural enemies is designed to restrict the thinking of people. It is designed to convince people that the real enemy is not the evil that rules over them, but some imaginary demon that would do them harm. This is the lie of tyranny. It requires your obedience in order to save you. Tyranny is disguised as culture and law. Social proof. As people begin to submit under the duress of violence to the will of the new authority, a principle known as social proof enters culture. The more people that obey the new authority, the more likely it is that others will follow. The normalcy of obedience becomes part of everyday life. It is natural to want to escape the violence of authority. People who live under the oppression of nations or thugs will inevitably accept the offer of obedience. A mugger will offer not to shoot if a wallet is surrendered. Rapists offer not to kill if virtue is surrendered. Mafias offer not to torture if payment is made. Governments offer not to obliterate life if laws are obeyed. The offer is sweetened with the illusion of enemies. When a person faces certain pain or death on one hand, or protection from an enemy on the other, the will to remain free will eventually break down. Law. Laws are decreed and written to legitimize obedience. Law impersonates principle. People are taught that what is law is right. They are not taught to do what is right, but to obey what is law. The legitimacy of law is the object of culture. Culture uses law to distort the minds of people into believing that they are incapable of seeking truth or living in peace. It teaches that law is legitimate instead of one's own mind. Control of speech. The most fundamental weapon of culture is the control of speech. While history has shown violent examples of this weapon, it exists in every culture as the code of propriety. The objective of the control of speech is making sure that those who were compelled to bend to the will of authority never gain the courage to look back. In order to maintain obedience, culture demands that everyone it enslaves and force its will upon those around them. It teaches people to call their recalcitrant neighbors weird or insane. It demands that every person turn on those who fail to obey the precepts of culture. Culture condemns as immoral and antisocial all those who fail to obey its precepts. In this way, culture shapes people's minds by restricting their speech. Further, culture endows its evangelists with adjectives such as noble and upstanding. Those who most closely follow the rules of culture, especially in condemning enemies, are rewarded for inflicting stigma upon the less willing to obey. It is this devaluation of the human spirit that proves the evil of cultural norms. Those who exhibit recalcitrance or suggest rebellion against authority are ostracized, berated, and demonized. It is hard to endure the loneliness associated with fitting outside of popular culture. This is how the control of speech is a weapon designed to break the spirit of man. It is a weapon designed to compel you to obedience. Once the people under a culture begin to enforce the control of speech upon each other, authority has been established. It now rules the very people who enforce its power. This is the design of culture, and authority cannot do with you as it pleases. Enforcement. There are times when authority must revert to violence in order to maintain obedience. There will always be a small minority who refuse to obey the tenets of cultural law. Because of this, authorities employ a constant stream of violence known as law enforcement, or police. These are not police in the defense of liberty, but police in the defense of authority. Cultures always teach that liberty and authority are one and the same, but the design of police is to wield the weapons of violence in the preservation of authority, not to defend liberty. Authority must also employ violence when culture breaks down. Throughout history, people have slowly and steadily learned more and more about their own worth, and hence demanded more and more freedom. Different cultures have fallen as people realize that culture is a lie. When cultures begin to break down, it is because people are learning about their value. Such cultures and the authorities they protect are doomed. Never once in history has a culture in decline been redeemed. When authorities see that their culture is being dismantled and obedience is no longer theirs to enjoy, they return to violence. These returns to violence are historically extremely brutal. The violent enforcement of law is a sign of coming liberty. Example. Take a look at a generic historical example of the pattern of tyranny. A rogue thug gathers together a band of men to extort money from the people nearby where he lives. In his success, he plunders massive amounts of money and grows his gang into an army. He successfully kills the previous officers of law and enforcement or subverts them through stealth. Knowing that he can plunder more value in the long term if he leaves his victims alive, he implements attacks upon everyone in his range of influence. He draws borders, he gives decrees. Importantly, he promises his victims that he will protect them from all other thugs. His victims slowly become accustomed to his will and his lies. The people become afraid if they hear their neighbors talk of escaping the taxes and cruelty. Soon they actively support the regime by targeting all treasonous speech and turning in deviants to police. Originally called criminal, the thug is now called authority. He is called law and order. This example could have easily described any gang of barbarians from the Middle Ages or from ancient history. It could apply to any king or emperor of years past. It could have described any warlord of today or any mafia. In fact, it closely resembles every authority that has ever been established. Once people are conditioned to accept the notion of authority, they normally obey without thinking. The object of law is obedience, and the destruction of freedom is found in the blindness of disobedience. The authority principle shows that even when a person would normally believe an action to be wrong, if ordered by an authority, they will still perform it. The establishment and exercise of authority over people is called the pattern of tyranny. In history, it is easy to follow this pattern throughout history. Adolf Hitler created an enemy in the Jews. Early on, German culture was manipulated and Jews were condemned as dirty and greedy, a people odd because they keep to their own kind. Soon the culture was in place where people were chastised for defending Jews. People who demonized them were championed. Speech was then controlled. Next, Adolf Hitler made Jews into the full-fledged enemies. The Jews became responsible for all social and economic ills. The solution was to put Adolf Hitler in power, to yield German liberties to him, so that he could save them from the enemy. Make no mistake, Hitler was not after the Jews, he was after the Germans. An evil man, he was simply willing to sacrifice millions of Jews to obtain power. Do not make the mistake of thinking Hitler was a racist. Follow the pattern. In short order, he ruled the entire nation and forced all Germans to serve him and his army. His true ambition was not racism, but total world domination. Socialism and communism create the enemy of greed in the same pattern by controlling speech. Profit becomes a dirty word, even though it only means that you have labored to create a better life. Money becomes evil, even though it simply represents your work, which is obviously moral. They create the enemy, but it is not greed they are after, it is you. If they can convince you that your money and your labors are the enemy, then you will yield those labors and your money to them. Authority is not designed to destroy the enemy, it is designed to enslave you. Democracies create the enemy of anarchy in the same pattern by controlling speech. It becomes immoral to suggest that one could break the law. It does not matter which law or what it says. Nobility is placed on the payment of taxes no matter how much they demand of you. It is the highest form of cultural propriety to obey the law, regardless of what it says. The enemy is the fictional anarchy, wherein no individual is safe, because everyone is a tyrant. In order to save you from anarchy, you yield authority to the law, you obey. Evil is not after the destruction of anarchy, it is after you. If you can see the tyranny in a culture that demands that you obey, no matter what is asked of you and no matter who writes the laws, then you are beginning to understand the nature of evil. Everything that is evil teaches you that you have limited worth. Rule of law. The rule of law is the single most dangerous idea ever inflicted upon mankind. It has gone by countless names throughout the ages of history. In more basic tribes, it is known as respect for elders. In the tyranny of royalty, it is known as nobility, birthright, and divinity. In communism, it is known as the supremacy of state. In dictatorships, it is known as the antidote to anarchy. In theocracies, it is known as revelation. The net teaching of this idea is that you are to obey the law, not because of its merits or its morality. You are to obey only because it is the law. It is assumed that even if the law is wrong, then it is right to follow because it supports the system, and the system is more important than you. In order for an intelligent person to choose what is right, they must know who is asking obedience of them. They must consider why it is being asked and what it is they are being asked to do. Only then can they decide for themselves if it is right. This is not what authority wants. Authority is not concerned with you doing what is right. It is concerned with obedience. Culture teaches that the nature of the law and what it asks you to do are irrelevant. Culture teaches that obedience is propriety. Culture teaches that when law is created, it becomes morality. Law is a weapon. It is used by evil to attack its prey, whether it is in the name of duty to king, loyalty to state, or rule of law. Law is the weapon used to extort control. Culture upholds the nobility of law. Culture teaches that law is proper and good. It never questions who wrote the law. Tyrant and brother are the same. Culture never questions whether or not the law is right. You are to obey no matter what it says. In this fashion, law is a powerful weapon to be used against you. All principalities create volumes of laws that take lifetimes to understand and armies of lawyers to manipulate. All of these things are weapons in the hands of the powerful, which they will use at your expense. Law holds value only to those who create it, and only because your culture demands that you obey it. The purest invitation to tyranny is your commitment to obey law, regardless of what it says. Against you, the law becomes the perfect weapon. Whomever controls the law controls you. Your worth is measured by the extent of your obedience.